Hi, On Orbit listeners. I hope your 2026 is off to a great start. For our first episode of the year, we're sharing a webinar I hosted in December with my fellow editor Mark Holmes about trends in defense demand for commercial space systems. We spoke with Krupal Patel, Senior Director of National Security Space Business Development for Lanteris Space Systems, and Scott Curry, VP of Geospatial Solutions for BlackSky. It was a great discussion, and we touched on topics like sovereign space demand, Golden Dome Missile Defense Initiative, and how commercial companies are working to move faster to meet defense needs. Hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Hello, and welcome to Via Satellite's Technology Webcast series. My name is Mark Holmes, the Senior Editorial Director of Via Satellite. I will be co-moderating today's webinar with my colleague, Rachel Jewett, the Senior Managing Editor of Via Satellite. Today, we are delighted to bring you a webinar titled The Commercial Defense Convergence 2026 Trends to Watch. This webinar is sponsored by BlackSky and Lanteris Space Systems. As we know, there's a growing understanding that space-based capabilities are critical for national defense strategies, and defense demand for commercial space systems has been a key trend in 2025, influencing both satellite communications, manufacturing, and imagery and sensing. 2025 brought the announcement of the Golden Dome planned missile defense architecture and a steep ramp-up in space investment in nations around the globe. Nations are working to secure sovereign communications and access to space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, ISR data. In today's webinar, you'll hear some of the key takeaways from this trend in 2025, how commercial companies are evolving their offerings to answer the call, and forecast what's ahead in defense adoption of commercial satellite technologies in 2026. Really exciting topic. So I'll turn it over now to Rachel to introduce our speakers for today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, and thanks everyone for joining us. Today, we're joined by Krupal Patel, Senior Director of National Security Space Business Development for satellite manufacturer Lanteris Space Systems, and Scott Curry, Vice President of Geospatial Solutions for BlackSky. Thank you both for joining us here today. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. This is a roundtable discussion, and we'd love to hear your questions as well. Please use the Q&A tab on the right side of your screen to submit your questions, and your name will not be shared if we read your question. This session is being recorded, and it will be available on demand within 24 hours after we wrap up. So now I'll have a brief intro from each guest. Krupal, please introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of Lanteris Space Systems, particularly in terms of how you support defense missions.
Well, thanks, Rachel. Great to be here with you and Mark and Scott. As you said, Krupal Patel and I lead the national defense business from a business development standpoint at Lanteris. Lanteris Space Systems is a world-leading manufacturer of defense, civil, and commercial space systems. We currently have over 100 spacecraft operating on orbit, serving communications, Earth observation, and even deep space missions. Our headquarters are in Palo Alto, California, where we have over 500,000 square feet of large-scale manufacturing and testing facilities. We've really been on I'd say, a journey over the last several years, where we have been diversifying our products and even the markets that we're trying to address. And we've over that time struck a pretty good balance where today we have about 50% of our portfolio with U.S. government business. That's a combination of both defense and civil business. We've been able to diversify our offerings all the way from proliferated LEO type of constellations, all the way up to things like the highest power electric propulsion spacecraft in the world. And so we feel like we're pretty well positioned for growth across a lot of different markets.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it has been interesting to see the evolution of Lanteris. Like you said, you guys have branched out and done some different things in the last few years. Scott, I'll turn it over to you for a brief introduction and how BlackSky supports defense missions.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. This is Scott Curry. Thanks. Really excited about being part of this broadcast today. I am currently the Vice President of Geospatial Solutions, but I previously spent 27 years in the U.S. government supporting national security and intelligence missions, both in several combatant command locations at the NRO and at NGA, and managing a lot of programs as a result of that. So I think that gave me insight into where I wanted to work when I left the government, and it was an easy decision for me to transition out and begin working at BlackSky, where I believe their culture matches the things that I was interested in, as they really see themselves as a tactical ISR from space company, delivering capability insights to the warfighter at whatever location they may be deployed to. And when I was in the government, even they had a platform now called Spectra, where they were brokering or consuming a multitude of commercial data sources, and then adding artificial intelligence and detect and characterization algorithms to that data in order to begin maturing those and working with the customer to build confidence and trust. So as Krupal just talked about the journey he's been on, we've been on a similar journey with that, and the adoption and increasing the adoption of analytics in operations for the U.S. government, and in particular foreign governments, who in often cases are far more easy or willing to adopt and adapt to these new algorithms and technologies, and sometimes even the U.S. government is. They don't have the 40 years of baggage that they're dragging along, that the U.S. government tends to take along with them as they try and, leapfrog into another technology, so to speak. But we have BlackSky has about 350 employees. Headquarters is in Herndon, Virginia. We have offices in Seattle and Albuquerque, New Mexico. Our production facility is in Tukwila, Washington, just south of Seattle, where we're currently building a series of what we call Gen 3 satellites, which have 35 centimeter electro-optical capability with a SWIR band as well. We're operating about 11 of our Gen 2 constellation satellites. Those are about 1 meter capability, and as I mentioned, we will replace over time all of those with our Gen 3 satellites. And we will build those out and launch those over a sequence of quarters over the next couple of years. We have a plan, a funded plan to do that, and we're on contract to do that with the U.S. government and a number of other ministries of defense worldwide. I think that the satellites is the interesting and sexy part of this, but really the utilization is, in our opinion, the most important, in getting to a point where you're delivering information at speed, and that's where really all the analytics come into play. The longest pole in the tent is always the exploitation of that image and discerning the data and getting the data off of that image that they can then use to inform decision making. If we can get them to utilize, get the governments and the customer to utilize commercial analytics and gain confidence in that, we can get to the kinds of timelines that they're talking about, which are in single-digit minutes of when the information is collected. So we look forward to continuing on our journey to do that over time.
Fantastic. Well, as you can see, we've got two fantastic companies, two fantastic speakers. So we're going to get started with the discussion now. So thank you, firstly, for those introduction. A question to both speakers to kick us off. As we all know, defense is not a new market for satellite. That being said, have you been surprised by the scale and the level of potential defense spending that we've witnessed over the last 12 months? So, Scott, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Krupal.
Yeah, I think I am surprised. I think pleasantly surprised, I would add. I think, the current administration, by putting some pressure on NATO to increase their spending, the threat of Russia in Europe has certainly awoken some of the governments there to that they may want to spend more money of their GDP on national security. I think similarly in Asia with the Chinese threat, they're doing the same thing in other companies like Japan and elsewhere in the Asian marketplace. So I do see them, everyone getting very excited and enthusiastic about increasing their defense spending for either sovereign purposes or in partnership with either the U.S. government or, in the case of Europe, other NATO and European nations to do so, and kind of spreading that wealth for the benefit of everybody investing in a kind of a consortium approach to get the best result. I think you're seeing some of that with, you've seen some mergers taking place between Airbus and the other company, Thales Alenia Space, and others over there that are kind of taking that to another level. We'll see how that plays out. But then you look at that in addition to what you mentioned earlier, Mark, which was the Golden Dome effort, which is, I think, what I'm hearing from a lot of people is kind of a central organizing principle that everybody who's been engaged in missile defense and missile warning and those kinds of things can kind of use that as a centerpiece to look at perhaps dual use missions for some of the system that they've been building to eliminate the threats that they were in contract to perform earlier, and then make that a more as a cost-effective way to support the goals and objectives of the Golden Dome system. But again, that's going to take, and this administration has stated they're going to invest heavily in that. So I think that is spurning and spawning a lot of new ideas and partnerships, et cetera, as the U.S. begins to kind of figure out exactly how they want to move forward on these programs.
No, super interesting answer, and the fact that you were pleasantly surprised was, I mean, that's a good thing to hear. Krupal, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think from the spacecraft manufacturing side, I would say we're a little bit less surprised, and maybe not surprised at all. If you look at some of the projections, like Morgan Stanley put out a projection saying that the space business is going to grow $1 trillion in the next decade. Those are the kinds of things that we have been observing for a few years now. And also, it was part of our diversification strategy that I talked about sort of in my opening remarks, is that we had been a very strong competitor in the commercial realm, and we wanted to leverage that capability for more of national missions. And so we made a purposeful investment strategy a few years ago, and we actually did start with proliferated constellations, right? And so that's where we came up with our smallest spacecraft. We call the Lanteris 300. We made a significant investment in being able to stand that up, and we're producing several of those spacecraft right now for the Space Development Agency, specifically their T1 and T2 tracking layer program that we do with our prime contractor, L3Harris. So overall, we've seen this trend of increasing defense budgets for a little bit of time now. Certainly the conflict in Ukraine accelerated that. There was a lot of observation and a lot of, I would say, I'll use the term awakening to the value of space as a result of that conflict. We might talk about a little bit of that later in this session. But I think that's kind of where we've seen, that there has been growth in defense budgets and in space specifically. And we position ourselves as sort of a mid-sized company, right? We're not a super large company, and we've been around a while, so we're not a startup as well. And so that's where we're trying to make sure that we're leveraging our position in the market for the benefit of our customers.
Yeah, and Krupal, I wanted to ask you, I'm sure that some of our attendees are curious. So Lanteris was recently rebranded from Maxar Space Systems and then announced a deal to be acquired by Intuitive Machines in a really interesting piece of consolidation. So can you talk about what this acquisition means for Lanteris and how it will impact how you serve customers in the defense market?
Sure. It's certainly in the near term, no change, right? We're going to continue to do the kinds of things that we have developed over a long period of time. We have capabilities across multiple orbit regimes, LEO, MEO, GEO, deep space, I mentioned earlier. We have a robotics capability. So all of those things we're going to continue to do to bring benefit to our customers, and particularly in a commercial manner, right? And that's, again, the topic of today's chat is really about this commercial and defense convergence. And so that's where we're really trying to leverage our current and existing capabilities. We're very excited about the acquisition. We think it's going to be able to help us serve our customers even better going forward.
Thanks. And then Scott, so I've been following BlackSky's Gen 3 rollout this year, and you just recently released the first images from another Gen 3 satellite that were taken less than 24 hours after it launched. What does the increase in capability with Gen 3 mean specifically for BlackSky's defense customers?
Yeah, thanks. We're just super excited about the Gen 3, the feedback we're getting from our customers already. In fact, it is exceeding the design specifications that we had for it when you get and look at the quality and accuracy of the data going forward. But the transition, so we started off with a Gen 2 1 meter satellite system. The transition to 35 centimeters is really a game changer for us and for our customers, as we can detect significantly smaller objects in the image and characterize those objects with far more granularity, such as distinguishing between fighters, bombers, transport aircraft, commercial aircraft, etc. Same can be done with naval assets. So the finer the grain of detail that we can do, the more accurate our analytics are going to be behind that. And we can deliver that, as I said, at speed and at scale. It's no longer common, from what we're seeing, it's no longer common for us to take months between launching the satellite and bringing that satellite into operations. As you mentioned, Rachel, within 24 hours, we had first light imagery or proof of life. And then we quickly turned to calibration and making sure it's working effectively. And we can do that within several weeks to months now. And that's our objective. We want to get that satellite into operations as quickly as humanly possible, so that because many of our contracts are built on increasing capacity of the constellation. So as that grows, the contract value with that grows with some of our customers. So it incentivizes us to get that up as quickly as possible. At the same time, it's not just about the satellites, right? As I mentioned, analytics behind it. That's of equal importance to us in developing those and maturing those and getting trusted use out of those by our customers. But I think what I learned in all of my time in the government was satellites are really sexy and everybody wants to see them get up there. And most of the time people forget about the ground infrastructure necessary to take advantage of it. So we are taking equal interest in making sure that we are upgrading the ground systems at all the antennas, downlink antenna sites, etc., because the Gen 3 satellite produces 4x the amount of data of each image than our Gen 2 did. So we've got to make sure that the comms and everything, the downlink speed is all there. And so we've been moving that along as quickly as our constellation's growing. So, we're just super excited about all this increased capacity we're having and the future of this constellation moving forward.
Oh, fantastic. And just a reminder to people, if you want to submit questions, please use the Q&A tab to the right of the screen. This is a great discussion, so please get involved and start thinking about your questions, and we'll get to those in a little bit. I want to go to Krupal. At Cybersat recently, one of the key themes was that space was becoming the next contested domain. Do you believe, sort of a two-part question, do you believe that to be the case? And if so, how does that impact the relationship between governments and the commercial space industry?
I definitely believe that's the case, right? space will be the next contested domain. The U.S. Space Force recently, in August, I think it was, put out a space threat fact sheet. And if you look at that fact sheet, it talks about the ways that countries like China and Russia are trying to deny access and the use of space to ourselves and our allies. They're testing a various number of counter space capabilities, which they intend to use to disrupt and degrade our own assets in space. So I definitely think that that's kind of where there's pretty good evidence to say that it is becoming a contested domain. As far as how governments and commercial industries are collaborating there, I think there's two things that has been a response to those threats. And the first one we talked a little bit about, that's proliferation. So one way to address threats is to not put all your eggs in the same basket, so to speak, right? So diversifying capabilities, disaggregating, if you will, into smaller spacecraft and distributing them in more orbits and more numbers is been a key strategy to address those threats. But the second thing, and Scott touched on this a little bit earlier as well, is really the need for moving quickly. And that's where I think governments are leveraging commercial capability. Many companies are investing in building capability, and the space economy is growing, like we talked about a few minutes ago. And so how governments leverage that is really kind of a response to this fact that space is becoming a contested domain.
I'm curious, Scott, I'm going to just bring you into this question as well, because I'm kind of curious to hear your viewpoint as well, just what your take is, space being a contested domain and the impact that will have on these relationships.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we work collaboratively, as we've been encouraged to do so by Space Force and others, to share any information we have on any sort of attempts to disrupt our operations as we in our satellites, and so there's some sharing going on. But as we, great comments, Krupal, because as we consider protection measures of our satellites, those typically cost us in dollars and weight and other things that we don't necessarily want to include. So diversification, going smaller, more satellites is kind of the direction we would recommend as well. But then we talk about the way in which we're moving capabilities that have tended to reside on the Earth into space, right? It makes us, it's like, wow, there's so many things going on when you look at optical downlink, crosslink, data centers in space, quantum processing in space. You've got, 5G services in space, all these things that we traditionally consider as kind of ground-based systems all moving to space. How we protect that, how we preserve our operations in space is going to be a hugely important topic going over the next really decades to come as all this infrastructure begins to move to space. So yeah, we're watching it closely. We're doing what we can. We get advice and counsel from the U.S. government on things we might want to consider. So they're very good at sharing things that they think make sense that we might want to consider. We take that advice, and we do or don't do things with it, depending on how we want it to affect our constellation.
Okay, Scott, I'm going to stick with you for the next question. It's kind of related to that question. Again, one of the major topics this year has been sort of sovereign space, and that's been a big talking point at a lot of big events this year, including our own satellite show and Cybersat. How do you see the equation between sovereign space and commercial space companies working with individual nations who are looking to develop their own space capabilities?
Yeah. Now, you're seeing that happen in real time, right? All these countries now are super interested in developing their own sovereign capability for space. And I think what I'm learning in my discussions and what I'm observing is in order to build your own sovereign space enterprise, you really need to build an entire ecosystem to support it, right? And I'm talking about from academic training and courses to incentive, to developing career paths for people to get interested in that, high-tech manufacturing capabilities, skilled technical workforce, all those kinds of things. And nobody can do that all at once, right? It's just an evolution that you need to take. So in our case, we've been working with several countries that have desires to buy satellites right off the production line, right? And own them and operate them themselves. Others want to buy them and let us operate them, and they just task the systems. Others will buy one and then leverage the rest of our constellation to fill in gaps in their own AOR. So it's very interesting how that's working, and they can do that with commercial capabilities and get into the marketplace more quickly than they otherwise would if they had to manufacture it all on their own. So I think leveraging what commercial gives them now gives an early entrance into the marketplace while they work with either that company or somebody else to start building out the manufacturing technologies like Krupal has and others that might allow them to kind of even build it indigenously, right, in their own area. So I think this is where certainly the commercial market is going. As our revenue is moving quickly in the international side. It's far exceeded what we're currently getting from the U.S. government. So we see that trend continuing over time. And we're excited about all the ways, the business relationships that we have kind of seen various countries interested in. And each one is a little bit unique. So we work individually with them to see perhaps what the best outcome is as far as a ConOps or business arrangement is for both of us to get what we need.
Just before the next question, I just want to get Krupal's views on that as well, the sovereign space issue.
Yeah, largely I agree with Scott. From a space manufacturing standpoint, we do have a lot of international customers outside the U.S. government because of our commercial communications satellites that we sell all over the world. I think our experience largely is maybe broken down into two tiers, right? There's sovereign customers that are going to have experience with buying and operating complex systems like a satellite system. And then there are going to be customers that I would say are emerging, right? They are having a recognition that space-based capabilities, whether it's communication or ISR, is needed for their own sovereign interests. But because they're emerging in their understanding and capabilities, a good option for them might be to consume services along those kind of capability desires. As Scott said, the satellites themselves are the highly visible part of it, but there's this whole other part of having the ground infrastructure and the operations capability, and then the skill sets that he also talked about, right? The personnel that you use to do all of the acquisitions, as well as the operations and the maintenance of these complex systems. So that's kind of where we feel like there's two different kind of levels there, at least from our customer base, from our desire to sell spacecraft systems to sovereign customers.
Yeah, I think European countries want you to move manufacturing into Europe in order to be more competitive with them. That's what we're seeing, and that makes sense if I were in their shoes. And I think that's maybe a little bit of why Airbus, Thales, Leonardo Space kind of are coming together to kind of strengthen European sovereignty in space, to fill that void and maybe compete more favorably with U.S. companies and others that are selling worldwide. So, I think it's a good thing. NATO is interested in acquisition. They tend to take a long, long time to do that. But so we're kind of watching that and participating in that as they move forward. But I think it's the way things are going to move now. I think the U.S., certainly for the next 3 years, while this administration is in place, people are going to get are going to focus almost exclusively on, their sovereign responsibilities for national security.
I'm going to pull in an audience question on sovereign capabilities. A question about timelines that you're seeing for demand for turnkey sovereign space solutions. Like, how long does delivering a system to an international customer, what's the timeline there?
From what I'm seeing, it could be as quick, it could be within a year. If you're talking about buying a satellite off a production line, and let's say we had 12 scheduled, you could negotiate for vehicle 7 and 9, for instance, right? And we would have to kind of figure out how to do that amongst all our other customers. But you could buy that, and of course we have a Spectra, tasking platform that with APIs that we could train them on and give them the capability, train them on the capability on how to task that constellation, etc. So I think it's possible to do that even within 6 months if they wanted to go quickly. The discussions in advance of that tend to take 6 months or a year before they get all that worked out. But I think once they put pen to paper on a contract, that can be accomplished in as little as 6 months. Now, a more complex system could take far greater, but if speed is usually important to them, then that can be arranged.
Okay. In terms of speed, we've kind of been talking about this, but do you have some ways that the space industry is becoming more agile and can still be more agile when serving defense customers to respond more quickly to their needs? Krupal, I'll start with you.
I think that the space industry has already demonstrated a very large degree of agility and innovation. Scott talked about their satellites, being having first light in 24 hours. Those are kinds of things that were not really possible, even just a few years ago. So I think the industry itself has been very innovative and agile in responding to customer needs. I think, the way I kind of think about this is, what can the government really do from an acquisition standpoint, right? What can they do to revise their acquisition practices to take advantage of these capabilities and these commercial solutions that have been put forth? We've been talking to our customers a little bit about some of our suggestions around those things. There's certainly existing capabilities like services we've talked about, as well as some organizations are starting to build spacecraft ahead of need, and so I call that sort of off-the-shelf capabilities. I think there's a third leg of the stool that we think is equally important, in that a lot of the government missions are somewhat stressing, and so we feel like existing capabilities across, for example, our main products are Lanteris 300, Lanteris 500, Lanteris 1300. Some minor modifications to those existing kind of capabilities, I think, could address our customers' mission needs. And so we've been talking about this sort of minimum modification kind of capability, again, to deliver those spacecraft fairly rapidly. But I think another key element is, I'll use it generically as training. I think the acquisition workforce is accustomed to doing business in a certain way, and our commercial customers operate in a very different way. They tend to lock down all their requirements early and upfront. They tend to have a lot of upfront engagement with us. They don't have constraints of working within, say, the federal acquisition regulations and some things like that, right? So they do have a little bit more freedom than the government has, but that's kind of where I think that those kind of training activities with the acquisition workforce would be valuable, just for them to understand how does commercial industry tend to acquire these things. A couple of other things that we think are important are increased prototyping. So having the ability to try out capabilities is something that we've been socializing with our customers, and then partnering with organizations that have some proven success. So those are all kinds of things that we think are important when the government starts thinking about acquisition and how can they move quickly and field solutions to mission problems that they need to get on orbit.
Scott, do you want to stay in there?
Yeah, I'm happy to add to that because I completely agree with everything that Krupal just stated. I think the way in which we go forward is we have a series of products and capabilities, satellites, etc., on the ground, and as Krupal mentioned, we would use this investment to the maximum potential. Right, is what I would encourage the government to do, and then tell us what additional items you would like to see or capabilities you would like to see that way we might want to consider adding. Right, that way you're leveraging all the investment from all the other customers that we have around the globe and keeping your costs down. I think, as you mentioned, it's the defense acquisition process, despite all the executive reports that have come out and other things, that is a slow process to change. And, we're in the midst of discussing a new capability now for the government that we would deliver in, 2028, 2030. And using our Gen 3 design, for instance, well, by that time, we would be launching Gen 4 and designing Gen 5, whatever that is, right? Because we're on this cycle of 3 years that we look at a new design and what do we want to add to that. So I think the speed at which you lock in requirements, it takes them a while to budget, figure out how to budget against those, and then the acquisition process and competition process can take another year. And by then they've lost the ability to surprise, right, and to take advantage of things that we're already doing. So we're working, and I see the defense industry trying to move in that direction. But it's a culture that's been operating the same way for a long time. I was part of that. For a long time, so I understand the challenges there. But those 700 pages of FAR regulations have a lot of wiggle room in them. If you get a creative contracting officer, they can figure it out. So you learn very quickly to appreciate when you've got somebody who is willing to accept some risk on the contract side, because they can do some incredible things very quickly when they really want to.
I was at Space Power last week, and acquisition reform was one of the main topics of conversation of what will that look like for different parts of the Space Force. So it's definitely some challenges and a lot of opportunities there.
Yes, we wish them luck. Love to see it.
Sorry, Scott. I was going to say, I do see some questions in the chat about ITAR, so maybe this is a good place to address that. So, definitely there's some ITAR considerations when we're talking about sovereign capabilities. I think the U.S. government has actually made some good progress in trying to, facilitate faster approvals of ITAR and things like that. But it is something that we have to be mindful of, certainly on the space manufacturing side, and we're pleased to see some progress being made there in terms of how fast we can get licenses, but certainly to meet the timelines that we need to meet to address some of the threats that we talked about previously, we do need to make some more progress there, I would say, as well.
Yeah, we're tracking a lot. I mean, we pay a lot of attention to ISTAR restrictions as we're looking at, selling to international customers interested in sovereign capabilities. We right now only have one ITAR restriction on our satellites. We manage that very, very carefully. We can remove it. We can turn it off. We've got, a number of things that we can do in order to avoid any sort of ITAR issues. So, yeah, you don't want to design a set. If you have aspirations to sell anything internationally, you want to be very careful about what things you are going to be restricted from transferring over. And if sometimes they don't own it, that's a whole different thing, right? If it's a GOCO, they don't own it. then you can navigate your way around some of those restrictions.
Interesting. All right. I want to ask a question about the Golden Dome, the missile warning, missile defense initiative. I know that the National Defense Authorization Act is still working its way through Congress. So, there's a lot to be determined at this point. But let's talk about how you all are positioning your companies to compete for Golden Dome. And do you believe that Golden Dome will be a game changer for U.S. missile defense? Krupal, I'll start with you.
I'll take that backwards. Will it be a game changer? It certainly will be if all of its objectives can be met. It's a complicated initiative. The way I think about Golden Dome is really sort of like in 5 major elements. I think of it as having a terrestrial and a space component, and then sort of a sensor component, and then an interceptor sort of component. And then the 5th element is the integration of all of that across the board, right? Sort of a command and control capability, and how do you use all of those capabilities? So I think the challenge of Golden Dome today is to do that big integration. There are a lot of systems out there, and so Golden Dome, we used to say that it's a system of systems kind of problem, and it's definitely that. So ultimately, it's a big integration kind of initiative. So how does that relate to space manufacturing? So for us, it's sort of that space layer, right, where there's sensors, and then in the future potentially interceptors that from a Lanteris space systems that we're interested in. But because it's an integration problem, we think that our experience as a systems house is really applicable to fielding systems, at least in the space layer, that can be well integrated into the overall system of systems kind of concept. And so that's kind of how we're approaching it. We are interested in providing sensor capabilities, and we're working with a variety of partners and with the government directly as well to figure out what our place in that overall integration effort is going to be.
Yeah, I think for BlackSky, so a couple of areas that we focus on in support of potential Golden Dome opportunities. One is, the fact that we can revisit areas every hour right now in an effort to move to even 30-minute revisits in a lot of latitudes across the globe. So that positions us well for kind of left of launch kind of things, or any sort of, long-range missiles and ICBMs, et cetera. So that's one of the strength areas that we have. We also do a lot of non-Earth imaging. So we're imaging other satellites and characterizing those on the fly. We're just beginning to do that with our Gen 3 constellation, but we have a lot of experience with that on our predecessor Gen 2 constellation. And we're working with some partners to run more algorithms against that to get even more detail on those satellites. And then the AI piece, right? Speed. That's a huge part of Golden Dome, right? You don't have a lot of time to react. So the AI aspects of that, embedding that in everything you do, is a big game changer, and something that I know the defense, the Department of Defense and others are going to be super interested in doing. So those are the 3 areas we're kind of primarily focused on at BlackSky in support of Golden Dome.
I'm going to follow up. Actually, we had an AI question for you, which seems perfect timing as you were just mentioning it there. How critical will AI capabilities be when serving defense customers? Scott?
How quick will they? How quick is the adoption, or how fast do we need to deliver it to them to meet their requirements?
I mean, could be either, but let's go for the second bit. How fast?
Yeah. So, I mean, the requirements we're seeing right now are single-digit minutes, right? And I'm talking 5 to 8 minutes delivery of an output from exploiting an image in that time frame to get it to a decision maker, or in some cases a weapon system to act upon it. So those are very, very challenging timelines. I think the opportunity to leverage like optical crosslink and other things improves our ability to do that. So we're watching that very carefully. Onboard processing of analytics on your satellites improves that as well. If they add data centers in space, what does that do to it, right? How much processing capability do I need on a satellite if there's a data center that I can access to an optical crosslink very, very rapidly? So, I think everything, Department of Defense always talks about timelines, and they never go. They always get faster and faster, right? So even in the fact that we're planning on, or having a requirement for 7-8 minutes, my guess is by the time that's delivered, it will be 3 minutes. And so that's kind of the going in assumption that speed kills, as they say. And that's something that the government, the Department of Defense wants to be able to react very rapidly to. I think the challenge is getting the confidence in those algorithms, the output of those algorithms, to be able to use them at that kind of speed. If you have somebody verifying it constantly, looking over the shoulder or reviewing it to make sure it's accurate, then you've lost that speed advantage. So I think that's where the trick is. It's the trust factor on the adoption of all these, the output of these analytics. That's going to be the long pole in the tent.
And Krupal, I have a question for you, and a very relevant question, I think. Given that many space companies now see defense as their number one target market, what will separate the winners from the losers here?
I think maybe three things. I think that Scott just talked about timeliness, and that is absolutely true. You have to deliver not just data, but capabilities. And so, organizations that can actually deliver as promised and on very rapid timelines are going to have an edge against others. So we have been putting a lot of effort into making sure that we execute well and that we're delivering the capabilities that our customers demand. But again, going back to the subject of this conversation, I think having commercial capabilities and being able to leverage those is another one of those discriminators in the defense market. These are capabilities that are developed on pretty rapid timelines, with innovative kind of mindset, because commercial markets really, are I'll say brutal in that you have to be successful, right? That we're all in business to serve customers, but also make money as well, and that's kind of where that brutality comes in terms of being really efficient at what you do. And the I think I've maybe combined two of them. I did talk about a rapid turnaround. So I think those are my three. Really, just the ability to deliver on promises. Number two, to be able to do it rapidly. And number three, to have some commercial capabilities, which translates to a way of doing business as well. It's not just all about fixed price, right? It's really about, what kind of mission assurance standards are you using? What kind of, contract structures are you using? So it's a variety of things that play into that third one.
Thank you, everyone, for the questions that are still coming in. This has been a really interesting discussion so far. I will mention that there is a handout from BlackSky in the Handouts tab, and we will have contact information for both companies at the end, but we still got time for a few more questions. I'm going to pull another one from the question tab. All right, so the satellite communication system is full of proprietary hardware and services. And the argument is that they cannot match the economies of scale required to make them more widespread and affordable. Are there efforts on standardization or at least efforts to ease integration of these different proprietary satellite systems to allow for a wider adoption?
I'll take that from a space manufacturing side. I think the answer is generally yes. We participate in a variety of efforts to try to have standardized interfaces. I talked about Golden Dome being a big integration effort, and kind of our experience as being a systems house. Like that's where we're really trying to apply our designs into being able to be part of a larger integration effort. So from a space manufacturing side, we have worked on a lot of different interfaces. There's been different efforts to try to standardize, for example, payload to bus kind of interfaces, and with varying degrees of success. If the question is really about do we need to do more of that, I think the answer is yes. But at the same time, I think the fundamental capability is, can you deliver the mission need at speed? And how the individual intermediary parts play in, I think you could maybe increase the number of participants by having more standardization. But overall, I think you really just got to keep the end goal in mind, which is you got to deliver what the customer needs, and you got to do that fairly quickly.
Yeah, I think as we look at our manufacturing design of our future satellites for Gen 3 and beyond, we're not in the middle of negotiating, the formats for this data and how they come. We are kind of looking at it as, okay, I probably need to have several ways in which to communicate, right? I need probably an RF antenna to consume it through existing Inmarsat and the Telsat and capabilities like that. And then I got to look at can the government or is the government going to come to agreement on a format for integrating with various optical crosslink services, right? Or optical downlink services. For a while, they were different variations, right? And those nodes take up a lot of power on your satellite. So you can't afford to have 3 and 4 of those things on every satellite. So you're trying to work with them and see and kind of watch and monitor where the government is going. I think it's certainly need to find some economies, on formats that they can all land upon. At the same time, we might not want to be entirely dependent on one particular kind of mesh network or whatever for resiliency purposes. So, all these things need to be taken into account as you move forward. But I would expect, as Gopal said, they really need to kind of come to agreement on formats for how we're going to kind of do this, or you're just adding more cost and more risk to all the satellite designs if they have to take into account 6 different formats of data and ways in which to consume it, right? Integration is the key. The more and more you simplify it by getting standardization in place in advance of that, the better off they're all going to be.
Okay, we're in the sort of the Q&A phase of the webinar now. So if you've got any questions, please go to the Q&A tab and get them in. We'll try and get to as many as we can in the last few minutes. We have a question here. How do you see the acquisition speed of organizations like the Space Development Agency impacting satellite development?
I'll take that first, Scott. And I would say that the key difference, I think, has been the use of a contracting vehicle called other transaction authorities, right? So it allows the Space Development Agency to actually do things that we talked about the federal acquisition regulations earlier. It allows the Space Development Agency to do things very differently than how major acquisitions were done in the past. So I do think that that's a good model going forward. We do see that being adopted in other parts of the government. But I talked about this earlier, and I think this is a key element of it. Because it allows the SDA a little bit more flexibility, they can operate more, I would say, commercial-like. They can have more conversations with prospective bidders and have more openness about what their real needs are. And I think that helps everybody. It helps them get what they really want and need. It also helps companies understand the requirements so that they can respond in kind. And I think those are the key tenets of being able to move quickly and address some of these threats that we talked about earlier that our adversaries are posing.
Yeah, we're seeing that at BlackSky. We're seeing that as a really excellent example of how to do contracting very, very quickly, right? The flexibility and the use of OTAs. So we have responded to a multitude of opportunities under the TAC SRT contract that they have. So we have had great success in responding to that. And I'm telling you, you got to be ready, because they release a request, a task order for a response. You have about 48 hours to respond. And if you win it, you got about 3 days to start. So you have to have a group of people in your organization, in your company, that is monitoring that and ready to respond, or quickly say that's not in our lane of the road and just not going to do that, right? So quick decisions are a must. But we really like it because it gets you, it's taking advantage of the capabilities both you may have internally, and it also forces you to come up with some partners. If it needs to be 24/7 and we need a radar provider in there, we quickly have a list of people we kind of reach out to initially and talk to them about. So it is an effort that brings a multitude of commercial companies together to solve problems very, very quickly and at very low cost. And some of these deliveries we have to have back to the customer in under an hour from the time we collect the data. So I think it's proven to be a very, very cost-effective way for them to answer questions from the COCOM specifically, because most of these are coming from various commands around the globe. I do know that NGA is looking at leveraging that contract to expedite some of their commercial capability orders as well, and they have agreement with that with the TAC SRT program office. So I'm encouraged about the opportunity to kind of demonstrate this and maybe grow that over time.
So there's one question I wanted to end on that I'd like to get just a quick take from both of you. Do you consider yourself a space company or a defense company?
I think it's certainly at BlackSky, we are a space company, space and ground company with AI, I would argue, and that capability can be utilized for a multitude of customer purposes, right? To include defense and intelligence, to include financial companies, oil and gas, all kinds of different ways. But I don't consider us to be a defense company, although I would state that the largest portion of our revenue stream comes from defense, right, across the globe. I think that that seems to be where people want to land first. And then we have seen opportunities where we've been successful in the commercial marketplace too, doing a multitude of other things. But defense clearly is the predominant revenue source for us right now. But there's a ton of other things that we can do, and we're kind of evolving that part of the marketplace as we move forward. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, Rachel, that we're sort of 50-50 between U.S. government and commercial. So I'd say we're definitely a space company with a defense portfolio. We've been a prime in the commercial and civil space for decades, and we're going to continue to serve those customers and those mission sets going forward. However, we do have a strong interest in supporting our government customers, particularly in the national security space arena, which is my responsibility. And we've built some capabilities to be able to do that. We didn't talk much about our Legion spacecraft, but that's our high resolution imaging system that we build. And we think that has a lot of benefit for U.S. government customers as well as allied sovereign customers. We talked about the fact that we're building 34 satellites for SDA, for missile warning, missile tracking, and that we have intention in supporting the Golden Dome initiative. So fundamentally, we're leveraging our commercial DNA to serve these national customers going forward.
Fantastic. A great question to end on there. We are just about out of time. It's gone by super quick. I would like to thank Krupal and Scott for taking part today in a really vibrant, interactive discussion, and also for Lanteris and BlackSky for sponsoring this webinar. We really appreciate that. I would also like to thank you all, the audience, for joining us for what is the last webinar of 2025. We wish you a happy holidays, and we look forward to seeing you in 2026.